Good afternoon, distinguished presenters and participants. Before I start the online seminar, could you hear my voice?
Yes.
I'm sorry, could you guys hear my voice?
Yeah, it's already clear.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So, good afternoon. Welcome to the panel session of the fifth online seminar on English Linguistics and Literature 2026. With the theme The Agency of Nature, Forging Ecological Consciousness in the Post-Human Anthropocene. My name is Weda Ramagarni, and it is my pleasure to serve as the moderator for this session. Today's panel brings together scholars and researchers to discuss how language, literature, and cultural narratives engage with one of the most pressing questions of our time: how we understand our relationship with nature in the era of the Anthropocene. Through diverse perspectives in linguistics and literary studies, this session invites us to rethink nature not merely as a background or passive object of human experience, but as an active present that shapes, influences, and participates in human existence. So, before we begin, allow me to introduce our distinguished presenter for today. Our first presenter, Anissa Pitria Isabella, with a presentation entitled A Psychological Analysis of Narcissism and Perfectionism in Oscar Wilde's The Picture of Dorian Gray. And our second presenter, Tiana Putri Utami, with a presentation entitled Emotional Denial as a Self-Defense Mechanism in Daisy's Character in Picking Daisies on Sundays. Our third presenter, Fidela Larissa Evelina, and with the presentation entitled The Influence of IT, Ego, and Superego on Love and Sacrifice in Katniss Everdeen and Pita Mellark's relationship in The Hunger Games. Our fourth presenter, Hendriansyah Raffi Prayoga, with a presentation entitled The Psychoanalytic Reading on Sexual Obsession in Nabokov's Lolita. And our fifth presenters, Galuh Arliana Nugroho Saputri, with the presentation entitled A Jungian Psychoanalytic Reading of Introversion in Chbosky's The Perks of Being a Wallflower. And our last presenter, Wisnu Aji Prasetya, with the presentation entitled The Constructing Moral Judgment Portrayed in Oscar Wilde, The Picture of Dorian Gray, 1890. So, before we proceed, I would like to briefly explain today's session format. So let me tell you about the house rules. So the first one is each presenters will have approximately 10 minutes to deliver their presentation. And second, after all presentations have been completed, we will continue with a discussion session and Q&A. Participants are welcome to submit their question through the chat box or private chat box. And the last one is I kindly encourage everyone to actively participate and contribute to this scholarly exchange. Thank you. So, now without further delay, let us begin our first presentation. Our first presenter is Anissa Pitria Isabella from UNES, and the presentation is entitled A Psychological Analysis of Narcissism and Perfectionism in Oscar Wilde's The Picture of Dorian Gray. Please welcome Anissa Pitria Isabella. You may begin your presentation.
Thank you so much. Can you hear my voice?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Waida. Good afternoon, distinguished lecturers, fellow presenters, and all participants. My name is Anissa Pila Isabella from Universitas Negeri Semarang. Today, I'm pleased to present my research entitled Narcissism and perfectionism in Oscar Wilde's The Picture of Dorian Gray, a psychoanalytic study. Okay, let me start. The first is background. Literature is not only a form of artistic experience, but also a reflection of human experience, emotion, and psychological condition. Through literary works, readers can be better understand human behavior and psychological conflicts. One literary work that presents complex psychological issues is Oscar Wilde's The Picture of Dorian Gray. The novel tells the story of Dorian Gray, a handsome young man who becomes obsessed with preserving his youth and psychical beauty. His obsession gradually develops into narcissistic and perfectionistic behavior, leading to moral deterioration and self-destructive actions. Although previous studies have discussed topics such as narcissism, morality, and hedonism, only a limited number of studies have examined the relationship between narcissism and perfectionism through Freud's psychoanalytic theory. Therefore, the study also felt that research gap. Next is previous studies. Several previous studies have examined the picture of gender from different perspectives. For example, Ainur Artati analyzed a psychoanalytic study of pathological narcissism, analyzed gender as pathological narcissism using psychoanalytic perspective, focusing on narcissistic personality traits rather than their relationship with perfectionism. Next is indoor psychological conflict analysis in the picture of Dorian Gray. Examine Dorian Gray's psychological conflict uh, through Freud concept of the ID, superego, and ego. Focus on internal conflict with discussing perfectionism. And Silva Tanaka, the influence of narcissism in the picture of Dorian Gray. The studies provide a valuable insight into the novel, but they mainly discuss narcissism or psychoanalysis separately. The next is research gap. Based on the previous study, I found a research gap. Most previous research focuses on narcissism, morality, or psychoanalysis individually. However, very few studies examine the relationship between narcissism and perfectionism using Freud's psychoanalytic theory. Therefore, the study fills that gap by analyzing how narcissism and perfectionism interact and contribute to Dorian Gray's psychological transformation, moral deterioration, and self-destructive behavior. Next is research problem. Based on the research gap, this study addresses two research questions. The first question is, what internal and external factors contribute to the development of Dorian Gray's narcissistic personality in the picture of Dorian Gray? The second question is, how do narcissism and perfectionism influence Dorian Gray moral deterioration and self-destructive behavior throughout the novel? These two questions guide the entire analysis in this research. Next is research objective. To answer this research question, the study has three objectives. First, to identify the internal and external factors contributing to Dorian Gray narcissistic personality. Second, to analyze the relationship between narcissism and perfectionism. Third, to explain how the psychological traits contribute to Dorian Gray's moral deterioration and self-destructive behavior through Freud's psychoanalytic theory. Next is theoretical framework. The study applies Freud's psychoanalytic theory as the main theoretic framework. According to Freud, personality consists of three structures: the ID, Seeks immediate pleasure and satisfaction. The ego balance instinctual desires with reality. The superego represents moral values and conscience. In addition, this study also uses the concept of narcissism and perfectionism to explain Dorian Gray's obsession with beauty and perfection. These theories help explain his psychology and transformation throughout the novel. The next is research methods. The study applies a qualitative descriptive research design with a psychoanalytic literary criticism approach. The primary data are taken from Oscar Wilde's The Picture of Dorian Gray. The secondary data consists of books, journal articles, and various studies related to psychoanalysis, narcissism, and perfectionism. The data were collected through library research and close reading. Finally, the data were analyzed through data reduction, classification, interpretation, and conclusion theory. Next is results and discussion. The first finding concerns the internal and external factors influencing the narcissistic personality. Internally, Jordan fears aching and losing his psychical beauty, desire for admiration and social recognition, and obsession with eternal youth and perfection. External factors. Externally, his personality is strongly influenced by Lord Henry hedonistic philosophy, Basil Hallward's admiration, and Victorian society emphasize on psychical appearance. From Freud's perspective, this influence strengthened the idea while the superego gradually becomes weaker. The second finding reveals that narcissism and perfectionism are closely related. Dorian's admiration for his appearance gradually develops into an obsession with eternal youth and psycho perfection. He refuses to accept a cube because it threatens his ideal self-image. The portrait symbolized the contrast between his perfect appearance and his corrupted soul. These findings show that narcissism reinforces perfectionism, leading Dorian towards psychological deterioration. Yet, it's the only thing worth having. Wilder 2003. The final finding focuses on moral deterioration and self-destructive behavior. As Dorian's narcissism and perfectionism become stronger, his moral awareness gradually declines. He becomes indifferent to the suffering of others, rejects civil fame, murders Basil Hallward, and continues committing immoral acts without remorse. According to Freud's theory, the ID dominates Dorian's personality, while the superego almost completely loses control. Eventually, Dorian destroys the portrait in an attempt to escape his guilt, but this act ultimately leads to his own death. He stabbed the picture with the knife. Wilder 2003. The destruction of the portrait symbolizes Dorian's attempt to escape guilt and the consequence of his immoral action, ultimately leading to his own death. The next is conclusion. In conclusion, this study demonstrates that Dorian Gray's narcissistic personality is shaped by both internal and external factors. His fear of aging, desire for admiration, and obsession with beauty are strengthened by Lord Henry's philosophy, Basil Hallward's admiration, and Victorian social values. Furthermore, narcissism and perfectionism are closely interconnected and contribute significantly to children's moral deterioration and self-destructive behavior. Through Freud's psychoanalytic theory, this study explained that the dominance of the ID and the weakening of the superego ultimately lead to Dorian Gray's tragic downfall. That's bring me to the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for your kind attention. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for Anissa Fitria Isabella for your insightful presentation. Now, we will move to our second presentation, and our second presenter is Tiana Putri Utami, and the title of the presentation is Emotional Denial as a Self-Defense Mechanism in Daisy's Character in Picking Daisies on Sunday. For Tiana Putri Utami, the floor is yours. I'm sorry, is there a problem because your screen isn't visible yet? I think the connection is not stable. Oh, yeah.
Your thing. Okay, is it visible and my voice is it clear?
Yes, clear. And your
Yeah, it's
screen
clear.
visible.
Your screen. Okay, sorry for the delay. Okay, good afternoon, respected lecturers and distinguished participant and everyone who present here. First of all, thank you for the time that opportunity that you're giving to me to present my research today. So my name is Diana Putrutami and I am from English Literature Study Program. And today I would like to present my research entitled Emotional Denial as a Self-Defense Mechanism in Daisy's Character in Cases of Sundays. Okay, in this presentation, I will explain how emotion denial is shown through Daisy's character and how it works as a self-defense mechanism based on Freud's psychoanalytic theory. And I will begin with the background of the research. Emotional denial is one of the most common psychological defense mechanisms. It occurs when individuals unconsciously reject or suppress painful emotion in order to protect themselves from emotional distress. This issue is important because emotional denial is only influence how individuals experience emotion, but also affects their decision, behaviors, and interpersonal relationship. The object of this study is the novel Picking Daisies on Sunday by Liana Kinkori, which published 2024. The novel portrays Daisy as a young woman, a character who repeatedly suppressed her emotion while struggling with past trauma and romantic conflict, making it inappropriate to literary work for psychological analysis. Previous study has mainly examined trauma or presents emotional denial conditions correctly. However, this study investigates how past trauma, anxiety, insecurity, relational traits interact with emotional denial in Daisy's character. Therefore, this research aims to provide a more comprehensive understanding of emotional denial as a self-defense mechanism. This background, I formulated two research questions. The first one is how emotional denial is portrayed in Daisy's character, and the second one is how does denial function as a form of self-defense for Daisies. To answer these questions, the study has two objectives as well. The first one is to analyze the portrayal of emotional denial in Daisy's character, and the second is to explain how emotional denial function as a self-defense mechanism based on Freud psychoanalytic theory. But before discussing the findings, I would like to briefly explain the significance of this research. This study offers both theoretically and practical significance. Theoretically, it enriches the application of Freud psychoanalytic theory in literary criticism by demonstrating the emotional denial is not expressed in only one form, but through verbal rejection, avoidant behaviors, and minimization of conflict. And the second one is practical significance. Practically, the study helps readers understand how unresolved trauma, anxiety, and insecurity and relational traits influence emotional denial, as well as how these psychological factors affect individual behaviors and interpersonal relationships. To explain how these concepts are connected, I developed the following analytical framework. So this is to illustrate the analytical framework of the study. The analysis begins with the psychological triggers, including past trauma, anxiety, insecurity, and relational traits. This experience activates the defense mechanism of denial, which appear as an emotional denial in Daisy's character. And the analysis then focuses on the three manifestation of emotional denial, which is verbal rejection, avoidant behavior, and minimization of conflict. And finally, these manifestations are interpreted to explain how emotional denial functions as a self-defense mechanism. Although denial temporarily protects Daisy from emotional pain, it also prevents her emotional acceptance and emotional growth. Based on this framework, the research methodology was designed as this follow. All right. The study employs a qualitative descriptive research design as it aims to interpret psychological phenomena represented in literary work. The primary data source is the novel Picking Daisies on Sundays by Lena Kinkori, and the data were collected through close reading and note taking of dialogues, narration, and character action that related to emotional style. And finally, the collected data were analyzed using Freud psychoanalytic theory, which particularly focused on denial as self-defense mechanism. And after applying all this method, the analysis identified three major manifestations of emotion denial in Daisy's character, which is the first manifestation of emotion denial is in the study is verbal rejection. One of example can be seen when Gabe, one of Daisy's friend, asks Daisy whether she has a feeling for Levi, the main male lead. Daisy immediately respond, I receive emotional response like no, no, no. Of course not. This response is significant because the repeated word no and the sudden pause before answering indicates an unconscious defensive reaction rather than a deliberate response. Instead of acknowledging her true emotional, they instinctively reject them through language. According to Freud's concept of denial, this verbal rejection functions as a psychological defense that protects her from confronting painful emotional realities. Therefore, verbal rejection becomes the first manifestation of emotional denial in Daisy's character. So, besides rejecting her emotional verbally, Daisy also expressed denial through her actions. That we can see in the second manifestation, which is avoidant behaviors. Rather than openly expressing her feelings, Daisy repeatedly avoids situations that bring her emotionally closer to Levi. For example, she chooses to skip Sunday dinner with his family instead of facing the emotional discomfort that the situation might create. This behavior demonstrates that emotional denial is expressed not only through words but also through actions. But by creating physical emotion and emotional distance, Daisy temporarily protects herself from emotional vulnerability. However, this avoidance also prevents her from honestly confronting her feelings and resolving her internal conflict. Then, avoidant behavior reflects another form of emotion denial functioning as a self-defense mechanism. In addition to the verbal rejection and avoidance behavior, the analysis also reveals a cognitive form of denial, which is manifested in a third manifestation is minimization of conflict. In one scene, Daisy repeatedly say about tell herself we were pretending, this was pretending, and you were pretending. Rather than denying that interaction occurred, Daisy minimized the emotional significance by convincing herself that everything is merely an act. This cognitive strategy allowed her to reduce emotional tension without having to accept the reality of her feelings. After identifies these three manifestations, the next question is what factors contribute to Daisy's emotional denial? Which is we were to discuss in this slide. The findings indicates that this emotional denial is influenced by both internal and external factors. Internally, the traumatic loss of her fathers leads to persistent anxiety and insecurity. This initial psychological experience makes Daisy fear emotional attachment and discouraged from her openly expressing her feelings. Externally, her emotional denial is reinforced by Levi's relationship with another woman, which intensifies her fear and rejection of emotionally vulnerability. These internal and external factors interact with one another, so ultimately shaping the emotional denial throughout the story. So, having explained the contribution factors, I will now discuss how emotion denial function as a self-defense mechanism. So based on this finding, emotional denial functions as an unconscious self-defense mechanism that temporarily protects Daisy from emotional distress. By denying her true feelings, Daisy is able to reduce the psychological pain caused by past trauma, anxiety, and insecurity, and relational traits. However, this protection is only temporary. Instead of helping her resolve her emotion, denial prevents her from accepting the reality, achieving emotional growth, and maintaining her healthy relationship with Levi. Therefore, the study concludes that emotional denial serves as a protective function in the short term, but becomes maladaptive because it is prolonged emotional conflict rather than resolving it. And finally, I would like to conclude the main findings of this research. So, in conclusion, the study reveals that emotional denial in Daisy's character is manifested to three forms, which is verbal rejection, avoidant behavior, and minimization of conflicts. This manifestation demonstrates that emotional denial is expressed through language, behaviors, and cognitive response. Furthermore, the finding shows that Daisy emotional denial is shaped by the interaction of past trauma, anxiety, insecurity, and relational traits, which collectively reinforce her tendency to suppress her emotion. Finally, the study concludes that emotional denial functions as an unconscious self-defense mechanism. Although it temporarily protects Daisy from emotional distress, it also prevents her from accepting reality, achieving emotional growth, and maintaining healthy relationship with Levi's. Overall, this study contributes to deeper understanding of emotion denial through application of Freud psychoanalytic theory, specifically in self-defense mechanism in literary analysis. Okay, thank you so much for your attention. I truly appreciate your time and your participation. Thank you.
Thank you so much for Tiana Putri Utami for your presentation, for sharing such a thoughtful and informative presentation. So, we move to the next presenters. Our third presenters is Fidela Larissa Evelina, and the title of the presentation is the influence of IT, ego, and superego on love and sacrifice in Katniss Everdeen and Peeta Mellark's relationship in the Hunger Games. Before start the presentation, just a quick reminder for the time for each presenters. I will remind you in the chat box or private chat box. So please check or pay attention. Thank you. For Fidela Larissa Evelina, the floor is yours.
Sorry,
Is my voice clear?
Yes.
Is my voice clear?
Yeah, your voice is clear.
Okay, good afternoon, our moderator, respected lecturers, and fellow participants. My name is Fidela Larissa Elvina Farda, and today I would like to present my research entitled The Influence of It, Ego, and Superego on Love and Sacrifice in Katniss Everdeen and Vita Melak's relationship in The Hunger Games. The first is background. The Hunger Games is widely recognized as a dystopian novel that portrays survival, oppression, and violence. However, beyond these themes, the novel also presents the gradual development of love and sacrifice between Katniss and Pita. Unlike conventional romance, the relationship develops under extreme survival conditions where every decision may determine life or death. Consequently, expression of love and sacrifice should not be understood merely as an emotional response, but also as a psychological process. Previous studies have mainly discussed the novel from the perspective of trauma, romance, survival, and resistance. However, few studies explain how Freud's personality structures shape these emotions and decisions. Therefore, this study applies Freud's psychoanalytic theory to explain the psychological process behind Katniss and Pita's relationship. Then we move to next slide. That's research question. In this study, I will use I address two research questions. The first is how are love and sacrifice portrayed in Katniss and Pita's relationship? And second is how do Freud's personality structures influence their expressions of love and sacrifice? The next slide is theoretical framework. I used a diagram to explain. The study employs Freud's psychoanalytic theory. The Freud explains that personality consists of three interacting structures. The first is it, which represent instinctive desires and emotional needs. The second is the ego, which blends those desires with reality. And the last is spiritual, which represents moral values and conscience. Importantly, these three structures do not work independently. They continuously interact in shaping emotion, decisions, and behavior. This interaction becomes the basic for analyzing Katniss and Pita's relationship. And the next slide is methodology. This research uses a qualitative descriptive method. And the primary data are dialogues, narrations, and character actions from Susan Collins' The Hunger Games. The data were analyzed using Freud's psychoanalytic theory to identify how the id, ego, and spiritual influence the characters' expressions of love and sacrifice. The next slide is findings. The first research question examines how love and sacrifice are portrayed in Katniss and Pita's relationship. The findings reveal that love is portrayed as a gradual psychological development rather than as an immediate romantic attachment. I used the diagram in this analysis. The first uh, stage is the bread in Satan. Pita's decision to give bread to Katniss is more than an act of kindness. It becomes a symbol of hope during one of the darkest moments of Katniss' life. This experience established the first emotional bond between them and explained why Katniss never forgets Pita's compassion. And the second stage is growing emotional attachment. Even when Katniss and Pita are separated in the arena, Katniss repeatedly worries about Pita's safety. Although she still prioritizes survival, her concern indicates that she no longer sees Pita merely as another tribute, but as someone whose life genuinely matters to her. And the next stage is growing trust. This development is reflected in scenes where Pita places his jacket around Katniss and gently strokes her hair. Unlike earlier gestures that Katniss believed are part of their survival strategy, she gradually recognized these actions as sincere expressions of care. This marks an important shift from emotional distance to emotional openness. And the relationships then develop into mutual care and protection. For example, Katniss risks her own safety to obtain medicine and cares for her seriously injured Pita. This action demonstrates that protecting each other gradually becomes more important than individual survival. And finally, this development reached its peak in the nightlock Paris in Satan. Instead of allowing one person to survive, Katniss and Pita decided to face it together. This scene illustrates that their relationships has evolved beyond strategic cooperation into genuine love characterized by trust, commitment, and mutual sacrifice. Overall, the findings indicate that love in the novel develops through trauma, shared experiences, trust, and mutual care that rather than through immediate romantic attraction. And this forces question 2. The second research question examines how Freud's personality structures influence love and sacrifice. First, the id. The id appears through emotional attachment and the desire to protect loved ones. For example, Pita openly expresses his love despite knowing that doing so may reduce his own chance of survival. And second is the ego. The ego mediates between emotional needs and the realities of the game. This is evident when Katniss chooses to care for the injured Pita. Her decisions is influenced not only by affection but also by practical consideration such as maintaining sponsor support and adapting to the conditions of the arena. And finally is Superico. The Superico guides moral responsibility and compassion. Both Katniss and Pita repeatedly refuse to sacrifice one another, even though the capital expects only one victor. Their moral values remain influential despite the life-threatening environment.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Reminder that there are 3 minutes remaining. Thank you.
Thank you. And this our research contribution. This study contributes to existing psychoanalytic interpretation of the Hunger Games by Susan Collins. Previous studies mainly interpret Katniss and Pita's Pita's relationship through trauma, romance, survival, or resistance. In contrast, this study demonstrated that love and sacrifice are not merely emotional response. They are psychological outcomes produced through the dynamic interaction of Freud's id, ego, and superego under extreme survival conditions. Therefore, this research provides a more comprehensive explanation of why the characters make emotional and moral decisions throughout the novel. And the last is conclusion. In conclusion, this study shows that love in Katniss and Pita's relationship develops gradually through shared experiences, trust, and mutual sacrifice. Furthermore, their expressions of love and sacrifice are shaped not by a single psychological factor, but by the dynamic interaction of id, ego, and superego. Thus, Freud's psychoanalytic theory offers a valuable framework for understanding emotional development and moral decision making in The Hunger Games by Susan Collins. And that's all from me. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much to Fidela Larissa Evelina for sharing such a thoughtful and informative presentation. Now we move to the next presenter is Hendrian Raffi Prayoga, and the title of the presentation is The Psychoanalytic Reading on Sexual Obsession in Nabokov's Lolita. For Hendrian Raffi Prayoga, the floor is yours.
Is it my voice audible?
Yes.
Is it visible?
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Uh, Good afternoon, moderator and all the participants. My name, first of all, thank you for giving me the opportunity to present my research today. Let me introduce myself. My name is Hendrian Syarafi Proyega from Universitas Negeri Semarang. Today, I would like to present my research entitled "The Psychoanalytic Reading on a Sexual Obsession in Behavior Nabokov's Lolita." In this novel, most people immediately think about pedophilia or child sexual abuse. However, my research is not primarily about describing those actions. Instead, I ask a different question to how can Humbert continuously justify action that clearly violate moral and social norms? To answer this question, I analyze Humbert's psychological condition using Freud's psychoanalytic theory. Next, uh, for the background of the study is obsession has long become an important topic in literary studies because it helps explain why the literary character behave irrationally and create conflict throughout the story. can be seen in a significant here. Obsession can shape literally character's behavior. And second, the in Humbert's behavior is not driven simply by desire. His actions are influenced by deeper psychological mechanism that gradually shape the way he thinks, interpret reality, and interact with other people. From the research gap, previous study mainly discussed Humbert's childhood trauma to his pedophilia or analyze the novel using Lacanian theory. However, only a few studies explain how the repression and the obsession work together in producing Humbert's behavior. Therefore, this research focuses specifically on those psychological mechanisms using fruit theory. Based on this background, I formulated the objective to this research. From research objective, the purpose of the study is to examine how repression and obsession shape Humbert's sexual behavior throughout the novel. More specifically, in this study, investigate a three question first. Uh, how do obsession motivate Humbert action that highlight sexual behavior in relation to the narrative? What type thoughts what type, what type obsessive thoughts do how the ego fantasy how this fantasy develops into obsession, and the third, what does obsession contribute to how how obsession contribute to the development of manipulation, control, and sexual behavior in this relationship. The study investigate the formation of the nymphet, second, development of sexual obsession, and the last, the ego role in maintaining obsession. To answer this question, I use Freud psychoanalytic theory in the next slide. Freud explained that experiences do not simply disappear, but instead they are pushed into the unconsciousness through repression. Although even this experience continue influencing behavior without the person awareness. Freud also divides the personality into three structures. The first, there is it. The it is represent unconsciousness, instinctual desire that seek immediate pleasure without the considering morality of social norms. Next, it's ego. The ego mediates between instinctual desire and reality by using rationalization and self-control to satisfy the it in socially acceptable way. Move to superego. The superego represent moral, value, and social norms that evaluate behavior and generate a feeling of guilt. There is repression. Move to repression. It pushes painful experience into the unconsciousness. The last is obsession. Produces persistent irrational fixation toward an object. Uh, After establishing the theoretical framework, I conducted the research using the following method. The study employs a descriptive qualitative research method. The primary data come from Vladimir Nabokov's Lolita in 1955, while Freud's psychoanalytic theory served the analytical framework. The data were collected through close reading. After that, the textual evidence was analyzed using content analysis in order to identify representation of repression, obsession, the it, the ego, and the superego. Now I will move to the main finding of this research. First finding is what is a nymphet or nymphomania? Nymphomania is a mental and emotional condition in a woman characterized by a sudden increase or extreme frequency of sexual urges or activity. It can be seen in this line between the age limit of 9 and 14. There occur the maidens who to certain bewitched traveler twice or many times older than they reveal their true nature, which is not a human, but nymphic that is demoniac, and these chosen creatures I propose to design as a nymphet. This line explain the nymphet was created by Humbert's own classification and not her actual identity. For next is another findings, nymphet as a fantasy.
I'm
The second finding demonstrate that the nymphet is not a real identity possessed by Lolita. Instead, it is a fantasy created by Humbert himself. It can be seen it's aligned with the line in the novel. Humbert say between the age limits of 9 and 14, I proposed to design as nymphet. And the second evidence is the shock Annabelle's death consolidate the frustration that nightmare summer made of it a permanent obstacle to any further romance through the cold years of my youth. For the first line, this quotation important because Humbert openly admits that the concept of the nymphet is on definition. It does not describe a reality. Rather, it reflects the way Humbert chooses to perceive young girl. And the second line is this, the quotation reveals the psychology origin of Humbert's obsession. The death Annabelle, the death of Annabelle becomes an unresolved trauma. Freud explained that unresolved trauma is repressed into the unconsciousness instead of disappearing. It later returns in another form. In Humbert's case, it reappears as a fantasy of the nymphet. Therefore, Humbert is actually pursuing his own fantasy rather than Lolita herself. Once this fantasy has been established, it gradually develops into obsession. And the next finding, the finding
I'm
showed
sorry to interrupt, sir.
yes.
Your time is 2 minutes left. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. The second finding how shows that Humbert's fantasy gradually dominates the way he perceives reality. For the evidence is can be seen in this dialogue. Ideas of the sun as her auburn ringlets fell over her skinned knee, and the hell furnace of localized lust. This evidence is ordinary moments become sexualized through obsession, and move the last findings. The third findings demonstrate how obsession finally develops into abusive behavior. It can be seen for the line "I love you." I was open tempered monster, but I loved you. And there were times when I knew how you felt, and it's hard to know it's my little one. And another finding is aligned with ego formation. I decided to marry who knows the eventual flowering of certain moral values, of certain spiritual substitutes. This line, these two lines align with the ego function as a mechanism that continuously rationalize and maintains Humbert's obsession until it culminates in sexual abuse. Moral awareness emerged only after irreversible harm has occurred. Uh, Finally, the conclusion is to conclude the study demonstrate to conclude the Humber sexual obsession does not originate from Lolita herself. Instead, it begins with unresolved trauma of unable deaths, which is repressed to unconsciousness later, return as the fantasy of the nymphet. This fantasy gradually develops into sexual obsession, and the conclusion of the main painting is repression transform Annabelle and Russell trauma in the fantasy of nymphet. The fantasy of the nymphet gradually develops into humble sexual obsession. Next, the ego sustains the obsession through rationalization and a compromise, leading to manipulative and abusive behavior. And last, the superego emerges only at the end as the novel as guilt and self-condemnation. Uh, I think that will be all for my presentation. Thank you for listening. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you very much for Hendrian Syahrafi Prayoga for your insightful presentation. Right now, we move to the next presenters for Galuh Arliana Nugroho Saputri. And the title of the presentation is A Jungian Psychoanalytic Reading of Introversion in Chabosky, The Perks of Being a Wallflower. For Galuh Arliana Nugroho Saputri, the floor is yours.
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. Let me introduce myself first. So my name is Arliana Nugroho Saputri, and here I would like to present my research entitled A Jungian Psychoanalytic Reading of Introversion in Tversky, The Perks of Being of a Welfare. So The Perks of Being a Wallflower is a novel book by Stephen Chbosky. Tell a story of Charlie, which is an introverted teenager who struggles with friendship, love, and trauma. And throughout the story, Charlie often keeps his thoughts and feelings to himself, which makes him reflect deeply on his experiences. As the story progresses, he gradually discovers his true feelings and begins to understand himself better. However, this journey also creates conflict between what society expects from him and who truly is. And for the data sources, the research collected from Charlie's letters, which is from the book, and the narrations and also the dialogues that reflect his introvert behavior, self-discovery, and his psychological conflicts, like how Charlie struggled to his trauma or even the social expectation. And the theory itself, the research used Carl Jung's analytical psychology, which focusing on the concept of introversion, individuation, and persona, and also the self to analyze Charlie's psychological and development. So based on Carl Jung's theory, introvert personality are not measured by how shy someone is, but by where their psychological energy is directed. Introverts focus their energy more inwards. They gain energy from spending time alone. So the research use this theory to examine how Charlie's introverted personality shaped his journey of self-discovery and how his inner identity interacts with social expectation throughout the story. As for the methodology, so the research used qualitative method and data are collected from Charlie's letters, narration, and dialogues in the process of being a flower. And the novelist read carefully to identify passages that reflect Charlie's intervention, self-discovery, individuation, persona, and the self. Then selected data are then categorized based on Carl Jung's concepts. And after categorizing the data, the researcher will analyze how Charlie's intervention contribute to his process of self-discovery and individuation, as well as how it creates conflict between his persona and authentic self in relation to three research questions in my research. The first one is what intervention aspects are reflected in the perks of being a wallflower. And the second one is how does Jung's theory of personality sees introversion and individuation as a self-discovery process. And the third one is the introversion rise, how the introversion rise the social conflict toward social expectation, the persona versus the self, reflected in the book. And for the research objectives, um, so for the research objective is aims to analyze Charlie's introverted personality through Carl Jung's theory of personality and explore how Charlie's introversion shaped his behavior, emotions, and social interactions to a self-discovery, as well as how it leads him to experience an inner conflict between his true self, the self, and the role he shows to society. And here's the data analysis. So I just put some of them or one of them to make it fast. And so for the first evidence is for the research question number 1. So what aspects of introversion are reflected in the books? So besides Charlie's habit of writing letters instead of expressing his feelings directly, he also enjoys reading books and imagining himself as one of the characters in there. And this behavior reflects Jung's concept of introversion because Charlie gains emotional and psychological engagement through his inner world, especially his thoughts and imaginations. And another strong evidence comes from Patrick, which is one of Charlie's friends. He said he's a wallflower. You say things, you keep quiet about them, and you understand. So these lines clearly shows that rather than reacting immediately, Charlie prefers to observe people, process his experience internally, and think deeply before responding. And second one is for the research question 2. So this line is actually in the situation Charlie is in a relationship with a girl named Mary Elizabeth. So in this line, he realized that he is not being honest about his feelings. He begins to questioning his own feelings instead of simply following what others expect from him. Through this reflection, he gradually realizes that he doesn't truly love Mary Elizabeth, but has genuinely feelings for another his friends, which her name is Sam. And this moment represents self-discovery. Charles' introvert personality encouraged him to continuously reflect on his emotions until he finally understands his authentic feelings. And this growing self-awareness becomes an important step in the process of individuation, where he moved closer to become his true self.
I'm
And
sorry to interrupt. Your time is 2 minutes left. Thank you.
okay, and the last is for the research question 3. So although Charlie realizes that he truly loves Sam, he continues dating Mary Elizabeth because he feels that it is the right thing to do. And in this situation, Charlie wears a persona, which is the social mask he adopts to fulfill the expectation of being Mary's boyfriend. However, his true self still holds his genuine feelings for Sam, which makes this conflict continues to grow inside him and more complicated. The conflict reaches its climax when Patrick dares Charlie to kiss the prettiest girl at the party, and instead of kissing Mary Elizabeth, Charlie kisses him and says, I know that if I kiss Mary Elizabeth, I would be lying to everyone, and I just couldn't do it anymore." So these lines or this quotation shows that Charlie can no longer maintain the gap between his persona and his authentic self. And at this moment, he chooses to be honest with his true identity rather than continue fulfilling social expectation. And so that's all for my presentation. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much to Galuh Arliana Nugroho Saputri for your presentation. That was super insightful. So now we move to our last presenter, to Wisnu Aji Prasetyo, and the title of the presentation is Deconstructing Moral Judgment Portrait in Oscar Wilde's The Picture of Dorian Gray, 1890. For Wisnu Aji Prasetyo, the floor is yours.
Is my screen visible already?
Yes.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Respectable teachers, the moderator, and participants. Thank you for giving me the chance to present my research analysis. And but before we continue the discussion, let me introduce myself. My name is Wisnuaji Prasetyo. I'm from English Literature Study Program, Universitas Negeri Semarang. So my research paper is titled Deconstructing Moral Responsibility in Oscar Wilde's The Picture of Dorian Gray, 1913. So later, we will be discussing about the moral responsibility of Dorian Gray by analyzing it using ethical perspective, but also analyzing marginalized conditions that can deconstruct the moral responsibility of Dorian Gray that have been presented in ethics perspective. So we're going to start with the background, which is the determination of moral responsibility. We may be wondering how do we determine the moral responsibility for an action? And intuitively, we will say that an agent will be responsible for their actions if only the agent caused the outcome. However, there's also conditions that can oppose to this perspective, such as Monroe et al. Suggests that free will correlates with moral responsibility. So when an agent free will is constrained, the agent will bear less moral responsibility. And then other than that, Engelman and Waldman also argues that indirect and passive caution by an agent correlates with less moral responsibility. In this sense, we can say that moral judgment is often messy and constructed by a layered causes. So moral judgment is not clean, and it's not clean as we say guilty or not guilty split. And this moral ambiguity is portrayed clearly in Oscar Wilde's The Picture of Dorian Gray, especially the protagonist, which is Dorian Gray. In the novel, he is clearly connected to the deaths of Sybil Vane, Basil Hallward, and Alan Campbell. But there's also conditions that can contradict to a direct assessment of Dorian's moral responsibility, which causes a question whether Dorian is responsible for their actions or not. And then to dig deeper about the ambiguity of moral responsibility, I use Derrida's difference as the theoretical framework. So Derrida argues that meaning is never fixed. He says that it is always relational because it built from differences between concepts and always differ. Derrida puts it as put off action, or meaning is always delayed and never settled. And due to the unstable meaning, the hierarchical binaries that structured meaning is also unstable because each term in the binaries dependent on its marginalized opposition. And to apply it in this paper, binaries like free will and influence, involve, uninvolved, harm and conscience, unstable oppositions, because each term depends on its marginalized term for the meaning, and this causes a destabilization of fixed verdict on Dorian moral responsibility. So the research aim of this study is to analyze the hierarchical binaries that construct Dorian moral responsibility through an ethic lens, and then second, to deconstruct this opposition to reveal the complexity and ambiguity of Dorian's moral responsibility. And then for the methodology that I will use in this research is descriptive qualitative research. This method is suited to this study because this study uses textual and interpretative analysis to analyze the novel rather than numerical data. And the textual analysis relates with the primary data, which is in this discussion will be Oscar Wilde's The Picture of Dorian Gray, 1913. And the secondary data that I will use is prior scholarship, which are book, article, website that relates with the scope of the study. And then for the process, I will conduct 4 steps of process, which includes reading, identifying, classifying, and inventorying before analyzing it with deconstruction theory. So now we will going to talk about the first finding, which is the result of the dominant reading. What I mean by dominant reading here is that I analyze the actions of Dorian Gray using ethics perspective, which later will have an answer of whether Dorian is responsible for their actions or not. And in these findings, I found that there are 3 conditions that can contribute to Dorian Gray's moral responsibility, which are free will, involvement, and harm. And we will discuss it one by one.
Sorry
So,
for interrupt, sir. Your
okay.
time is 3 minutes left. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the reminder. In the first finding, Dorian can be constructed as acting based on free will because there is no external coercion that drives Dorian actions. Because Dorian Gray acts based on his the source of his action is due to his choices, making him morally responsible. And the evidence here, you can see that Dorian rejects Sybil Vane purely out of his own fading desire, and later he kills Basil Howard out of personal anger and revenge. And then the self-portrait, which indicates Dorian, the effect of Dorian actions. Dorian claims that the portrait is the face of his soul, showing that his actions come from within his soul rather than outside pressure. And this aligns with Monroe's perspective that relates with free will, indicating that Dorian is responsible for their actions because he acts based on free will. And then the next is Dorian involvement. And according to Sartorio's perspective, Dorian is considered as involved directly and indirectly towards the death of Sybil Vane, the death of Basil Hallward and Alan Campbell, which causes Dorian to be responsible for the outcome. And then there is also harm. Dorian also perform harm towards others emotionally and physically by cruelly reject Sybil Vane and then killing Basil Hallward out of sudden burst of anger, blackmails Alan into disposing of Basil's body, and later takes his own life. And this evidence strengthened the notion that Dorian is culpable or responsible for the harm that happens towards others. And with those findings, it seems to be clear that Dorian is responsible for their actions. However, the contraction reading shows the otherwise meaning because there's other condition that can contradict to the result of the finding ones. In here, you can see that Dorian is, rather than acting based purely on free will, Dorian is also acted based on the influence of others. Because Lord Henry's corrupting philosophy and the self-portrait dual role de-established the pure free will. Lord Henry here received Dorian's worldview to new hedonism and influenced Dorian to see youth as the most important thing, and the self-portrait also influenced Dorian to act without considering moral ethics due to the existence of influence here, rejects the fixed moral judgment of Dorian Gray as responsible. And then there is also other condition that relates that can deconstruct the first finding, which is the uninvolvement of Dorian Gray. At first, Dorian is seen as involved in others' death. However, there's also a contribution of Dorian's victim in their own death, such as Sybil Vane dependency towards Dorian Gray, and then Basil obsessive adoration, and Alan complicity to show the victims. Dorian and Alan complicity, and this shows that the victims of Dorian Gray aren't purely passive either, causing an direct moral judgment of Dorian Gray to be deferred.
Sure. I'm sorry to interrupt you again. The time is up.
Okay. I'm gonna explain the conclusion, the summary of my research. Is it allowed? Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
So, the summary of the research is, we can see at the first finding, we find that from an ethics standpoint, Dorian is clearly morally responsible. And however, in the second finding, we found that from a deconstructive standpoint, the responsibility of Dorian Gray toward his action is complex, unstable, and never fully closed off. In here, the research paper doesn't say that Dorian suddenly become innocent, but rather that mentioning that moral responsibility is a complex and unstable meaning that can always develop regarding the contextual condition that we can see. I think that's all. That is all about my presentation. Thank you everyone for your attention and participation. Hope you guys have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you so much to Wisnu Aji Prasetyo for your insightful presentation. So right now, thank you to all presenters for sharing your valuable research and perspectives. From today's presentations, we can see various ways in which literature and language studies contribute to understanding ecological challenges and the changing relationship between humans and the more than human world. So we will now move to the discussion and Q&A session. For participants who would like to ask questions, please write your question in the chat box, or you can raise your hand from reaction. And please mention the name of the presenters you would like to address your question to, and don't forget to put your name and your institution or affiliation to and address to whom your question is. Thank you. I will wait until 2:30. If there are no questions, I will end the session. Thank you. If there are no questions from both presenters and participants, let me close this session. So, unfortunately, we have reached the end of our discussion session. I would like to express my sincere appreciation to all presenters for sharing their valuable ideas and research findings, and to all participants for their active engagement. And today's discussion reminds us that language and literature do not only represent the world around us, but also shape the ways we understand, imagine, and respond to ecological realities. And may this discussion inspire further research and collaboration in exploring the relationship between humans, nature, and the wider ecological community. And thank you once again for your particip- participation in the fifth online seminar on English, Linguistic, and Literature 2026. I am Hueda Rahmagarni, and it has been an honor to moderate this session. And have a wonderful day. And don't forget to return to the main room. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you.